Last week, Reform lost in the Gorton and Denton by-election. But even though they came a respectable second, beating Labour in a seat where Keir Starmer's party previously won over 50% of the vote, they were very, very bad losers. Things were so bad that critics of the party on social media renamed Matt Goodwin, the party's candidate in the seat, Matt Badloss. And the whinging and complaining was still going as of yesterday afternoon, with Goodwin saying this on LBC.
If we do not sort this out, Nick, what I'm worried about, given the ongoing demographic changes in our country, high levels of immigration, high levels of demographic change, our democracy, Nick, my big concern, I haven't actually said this publicly since the election, is increasingly our democracy will start to look like some corrupt political system closer to, say, Lebanon or Sierra Leone than a modern, Western, liberal democracy. That is what I'm concerned about, Nick.
Let's finish then with how you and your colleagues at Reform want to see. So no foreign-born voters. What about postal votes? How would the system look under this? Mr. Goodwin.
Well, remember, Tony Blair, again, it all goes back to Blair, but he was the man who introduced widespread postal voting. What Nigel Farage has said over the weekend correctly is let's restrict postal voting to people who are disabled or very elderly. Let's not make postal voting a sort of mainstream part of the democratic process because, Nick, we don't know what's going on behind closed doors. Nigel Farage has always brought up his memory of somebody turning up at a polling station with a Sainsbury's bag full of 1,000 votes. You know, this should not be happening. We're not living in the Middle East, Nick. We're living in, one of the greatest democracies in the history of the world.
And you're not just doing this, lastly, because you're a bad loser. This is because the democratic process went through, the particular by-election constituency spoke, and you didn't like the result. Isn't that the reality?
Let me just leave you with this, Nick. I don't mind beating the Labour Party in the sixth safest Labour seat. I think this by-election was a success for Reform. But I tell you, I've seen this with my own eyes up close. I'm deeply, deeply concerned about where our democracy is heading.
He's crashing out. I mean, we've called him Matt Badloss. Let's call him Matt Headloss. He's gone. You know, Gary Lineker, when Gazza got that yellow card at World Cup 90. I feel like saying that to Farage. Maybe have a word. I mean, he's clearly been crying, by the way. I mean, I shouldn't say that because I don't know. Let me rephrase that. He looks like he's been crying prior to talking to RBC. His eyes are red and bloodshot. He lost by 4,500 votes. If he lost by 200 votes, right, you can do this whole stop the steal thing. You can. Doesn't mean it's right, but you can. It's plausible. You lost by 4,500 votes. Now, call me old-fashioned. But when an insurgent campaign comes from nowhere to prevail in a by-election, isn't the media meant to speak to the winner? That's how it used to work anyway. Yet I've seen more of Matt Goodwin, who already has a large profile and will continue to do so regardless, than for a literal member of Parliament. And of course, that's Hannah Spencer, the Green Party's 5th MP. And it gets worse for Reform because in a poll released today by YouGov, no less, they are down a point, while the Greens, well, they're up by 4. As you can see, Reform is on 23%. As I say, down 1. The Greens are just behind on 21. They're up by 4. And that's 5 points ahead of both Labour and the Tories. To repeat, this is YouGov, gold standard. The Greens are 5% ahead of both the major parties. 5%. It's not the margin of error. According to our friends over at Stats for Lefties, that vote is projected to lead to this outcome at Westminster. As you can see, Reform short of a majority, which would be 326. They're on 285. Even if you include the Tory vote alongside Reform, there is nothing approaching a majority. The Greens are on second with 125 seats. The Lib Dems on third with 89. SNP on 44. So if anything, actually, a rainbow coalition led by the Greens would have more seats than Reform and the Tories. Quite funny. Although there is more data besides that. If anything, it's more important. This is polling by More in Common about who voters would vote to stop. Really, really key. This has been tweeted by Ed Hodgson from More in Common, tracking our negative voting intention. Who would Britons vote against? Who would they vote to stop? Reform at top with 38%, that's up 9. Labour second at 34, down 4. Tories and Greens on 7, Lib Dems on 3. Now, this is really key. Reform are top and Labour are the government. And Reform have gone up 9 points That's what happens when the electorate sees Matt Goodwin, I guess, for a month. Sorry, I don't mean to be mean. That's a lot, right? They've got up 9 in a month. And before I go to you, Kieran, here's the polling average of the major parties. This is, again, courtesy of Stats for Lefties. Poll average, February 2026. Reform, it's really important to say, Reform is still leading. They've, I think, led over 200 polls now nationally. Reform on 28.4%. That's up 13 on the last general election. Tories on 18.7%, down 5.7% on the last election. Labour also on 18.7%. That's down 16% on the last election. The Greens on 14%, Lib Dems on 12.4%. That's the lowest ever score for Labour in a polling average. I presume the Tories are getting there as well, right? But that's pretty extraordinary that you have the Greens, Labour and the Tories in the average of polls now kind of converging. I have a theory, Kieran, and I know this is going to sound mean, and I know our audience don't like reform, but I also don't like to stick the boot in. I really don't. When you've lost, I actually, well done to anybody who stands public office. It's not easy. It's really, really hard work. More people should do it. We should incentivize and encourage more people to do it. And I think, you put your hat in the ring, you shouldn't get a kicking. I think all of that. However, I think what Matt Goodwin has really shown over the last month is that infinite complaining, whining, and whinging is not a good look. And it's something I've been thinking about for a while. When I see reform on the TV or I hear them on the radio, I read about reform, all I hear about is moaning, negativity, pessimism, doomerism, the black pill. Now, I get you've got to do some of the politics of grievance. I get that. And they're very good at it. And you know what? There are things in this country that are really broken and you should be aggrieved about. But it does feel that people can't take that, Kieran, for 5 years. Constant moaning. It reminds me of that kind of ex-girlfriend, right? I say this as a straight man. I'm sure there's many women think the same about ex-boyfriend. And they were really good looking. But they just whinged. They just complained. They just moaned. And I've had female friends say the same about some men in their lives. And no matter how good looking they are, after a certain point, you just say, look, I can't handle this anymore. And that's kind of the vibe with reform. They just whinge. They just complain. And it puts you in a depressive state. And people want to be optimistic. They want good vibes. And that was the gift of Farage for a very long time, is that he channeled the politics of grievance, but he also looked like he was enjoying himself. He was a bit of a lad, bit of a charmer. It doesn't feel like people like Matt Goodwin have remotely learned that lesson after watching Farage for 20 years.
Okay, you can be good cop on this. I'll be bad cop because I'm loving every second of this and I think I want to stick the boot in as far as I possibly can. First of all, I've seen people 2 days into a ketamine binge who look better for Matt Goodwin in that footage. Why anybody would put themselves in front of a camera in that state is completely and utterly beyond me. I think that this loss is exerting an outsized or disproportionately sized impact on Reform's brand, very largely because of where they were in their kind of development cycle. So up until recently, Reform has been the new kid on the block. It's sprung from nowhere, and it's been going from strength to the extent that people started to report on Reform as though it was a kind of invincible project. But it was this juggernaut that was just going to steamroll it all on left and right. I mean, not so much left, but, some elements of those that folded for Keir Starmer at the last election and the right, and completely gobble up everything and win a landslide at the next election. And I think this loss coming at this moment in time is much more devastating to them than it might have been at another time, even if it were the same circumstances, 4,500 margin and Matt Goodwin and all the rest of it. So to have their kind of invincibility bubble punctured at this moment in time when they seem to just be on the way up with defections and all the rest of it, good polling, is, I think, the reason that this seems so catastrophic for them. And this reaction just makes things worse. I mean, it just makes things so much worse. And this touches on the other important part of all of this, Aaron, as you rightly say. There is a mismatch if they continue down this path, because as much as I utterly despise Nigel Farage, one thing that is undeniable is that he channeled this kind of Reaganite optimism.
Yeah.
You know, he kind of became a vehicle for, like you say, grievance politics, in my view, very dark demagoguery and dog whistle politics, but in a kind of optimistic, Reaganite, positive, charming, funny, light-hearted.
A sunny guy, right?
Sunny guy.
He comes in the room, you think, things are looking up.
Exactly, a kind of sunny capsule. It was all, you know, captured within that, and that was the brand. That was the brand. So at the moment, clearly, reform has fallen off, and the way they've responded to this loss is like a football club losing, and then just like falling behind, you know, completely bottoming out.
They've done an Arsenal.
They've done an Arsenal. They bottled it. Yeah. And so I think that you know, and for those of us, as I say, I want to stick the boot in a bit, to see a grown man who has had a lot of things his own way in life, who's part of a political culture and a culture wars that constantly tells us that people are too weak these days, that people are too sentimental, that people are too sensitive, that masculinity has become too effeminate and all of that kind of stuff. To see such a person, you know, crippled by what is essentially a loss in a very privileged setting with absolutely few consequences, really, in any significant sense. What it really does is it reaffirms for us something we probably all knew in our hearts, which is that if Matt Goodwin, Farage, their ilk, were subject to a fraction of the hardship that the vulnerable people in society, that they make their kind of culture wars pinatas, you know, trans people, immigrants, refugees, if they were subject to 1/10 of the hardship that those people have to suffer, they would utterly crumble into a little ball and beg for their mummies.
He's done a William Gallas, hasn't he? And he's still going. I mean, that's the thing. Two responses there. First of all, if that was me, I know my dad, if I was literally days later on TV or radio, my dad's son, it's embarrassing. You know, he's sort of very quite macho Middle Eastern man. His son, come on, you're embarrassing the family. You know, pull it in, you know, get yourself, take a week off, go on holiday. That's what he would say, right? But why aren't Reform doing that? Why isn't Farage just saying, you know what, Matt, this isn't looking good for us. We just showed you a bunch of polling data. The more they've seen of this guy in Reform over the last month, the more unpopular they've become. People are now saying they're more likely to vote against Reform, stop Reform. That's gone up 9% in 1 month. So yes, they had a good result in this by-election. I think that's really important. That is really important. They beat Labour. They came second in the Northwest. If you had this kind of performance, this kind of swing nationally, I think there was one bit of data that said they'd win about 450 seats. That's an important bit of data. It's very real. There's another bit of data, which is they've seen loads of Reform and a Reform politician who's not Nigel Farage over the last month, and people don't like it. People do not like it. Before we conclude tonight's show, we have to talk about the Greens. We have to talk about the Greens, right? Because I think they were second in Find Out Now. They were third with another pollster, I can't remember who. Labour were on 18% with Opinium. That's the lowest ever polling with Opinium. So clearly Labour struggling. Tories, meh, who knows. Reform, kind of on a little bit of a downward trajectory. But the Greens doing terrifically well. They'll do well in May with the local elections. I suppose one line of argument is the more exposure the Greens have from national political media, if people genuinely think they could win 40, 50 seats at Westminster, that's a long way away, by the way. But if that's plausible, they're going to get a lot of scrutiny, and deservedly so, of course, from the media, much of the right-wing media, and that won't be deserved, and much of it won't be fair. Some people would say, well, you know, Reform are crumbling now a little bit, or Matt Goodwin's crumbling, because of that kind of scrutiny, but actually the Greens would do a hell of a lot worse. What would you say to that?
I would say that there's probably some truth in that they will come under more scrutiny, and that they're right now probably in some kind of Goldilocks zone where it's not too hot and it's not too cold. They can get onto national platforms, not as much as they should do. You're right, Aaron, to point out that Hannah Spencer wasn't invited on LBC, as far as I'm aware. Maybe she was, but it was Matt Goodwin that's being interviewed and not the winner. But they're also not so hot in that they're not having, you know, every single front page of every newspaper running bad stories about them raking up mud. And there are some that are starting to trickle out, by the way. But generally, I think they're probably in that Goldilocks zone, yeah. But, you know, I think the people that I've spoken to that work around the Green Party or are activists or support the Green Party, they take the same line on it, which is that, the British left has kind of done a road test on this. It's gone through this process between 2017 and 2019. You'll remember this better than anybody, Aaron. Before 2017, the legacy media and the political class didn't really take Jeremy Corbyn that seriously. I mean, the Labour Party did, because they wanted him out. They wanted to dislodge him. But the rest of the kind of political establishment, the media, didn't. And so partly why he did so well in 2017 was that they hadn't turned the dial up to 11 and, bombarded the public with all manner of negative story, day after day after day after day until 2019 happened. It's not the only reason that Jeremy Corbyn lost the election, badly in 2019, but it is one significant reason. And so I think a lot of people who support the Green Party, who are maybe going to be part of you mentioned Arsenal, but in a different context, the electoral Arsenal that goes in to the 2029 or whatever it is election, that helps the Green Party put its best foot forward and put in its best showing for that election. They feel that they have already been battle tested in this respect. And I think it's the onslaught, if the Greens continue to grow and do well and look like a credible electoral force, whether that's 30 seats, 40 seats, forming a coalition with other progressive parties, or whether that's 20 seats plus, there is inevitably going to be massive scrutiny on the party because there are a lot of vested interests and established interests reflected in the media, the structure of ownership in the media, that do not want that to happen at any cost. And it's not in their material interest for it to happen, by the way. So, of course, they're going to throw everything at stymieing that outcome, a good Green election, whatever that looks like. So, yeah, I think absolutely we should batten down the hatches.
I think also if you're the Labour Party, on the one hand, yeah, you want to attack the Greens because they're coming onto your turf. They just won in a by-election, which was previously your seat. But you're probably thinking, hey, you know what? There's probably a sweet spot where the Greens do pretty well and they take all these strays. And actually, we're looked at as the moderate option by the Times, the Sun, the Murdoch Press, and so on. I have to say two things. Firstly, Hannah Spencer, an extraordinary candidate. Very, very strong candidate. Her acceptance speech, we discussed on Friday night, hit so many notes. Yeah. You could see Goodwin behind her thinking, Christ, this is what my voters talk about. Litter, fly tipping, antisocial behaviour, high streets, small businesses just, not getting a chance to succeed. And I think that's partly why Reform is so angry. It's because they can't just pigeonhole the Greens now as these ultra-left social liberals who will tell you off for taking a package holiday once a year, right? There's actually a substantive political offer now to the working class, the middle class, talking about a really wide range of issues. And I think the problem for Reform, and also the problem for the media that part of the media that wants to attack the Greens, is going to be that nobody thinks the Greens are going to form a government. Right, even though there's that polling showing them in second, people think, oh well, I'd quite like the Greens to have 30 MPs. That would take politics in a direction I quite like. They might not. They actually might want Zach Polansky not to be the PM. They might prefer Starmer to be the PM, but they think, I care about climate issues. I want Labour to be a bit more left wing. I want to be a bit closer to Europe. I like rewilding beaver. Let's have 30 MPs, great. Whereas Reform's pitch is, we are going to be the government. And that is something really concrete that people will want to stop. People are not going to turn out in their droves and say, no, no pass around, no 30 MPs to the Greens. It's crazy. And so what you see in the response to Hannah Spencer is people like that idiot former editor at the Jewish Chronicle. What's his name? Jake Wallace-Simons. Comparing her win, the 5th Green MP in Parliament, comparing it to the Islamic Revolution of 1979. That hyperbole works when it's Jeremy Corbyn in 2017 because the guy might be the PM. Raise the stakes, make it existential, because people will be like, well, actually, Christ, this guy will be in charge of my life in many ways. She's the 5th MP for a minor political party who have as many members of Parliament as the DUP, a political party that most people in England, I would say 90% plus people in England, have never heard of.
Really briefly to jump off the back of that, I know we've run over so much. First of all, just want to clarify, Jake Wallace-Simon is not my mate. I said that sarcastically. The victory, Hannah Spencer's victory is a victory for two things, essentially, Aaron. Local democracy and the local members of a party being empowered to pick someone who's of the community And I think that that was enormously effective in creating a situation in which the Greens could communicate effectively local concerns to local people. That can't be underestimated. And obviously the big kind of villainous counterpoint to that in the past few years is the Labour Party, who parachuted infinity candidates in at the last election. So it's a victory for local democracy. And it's also a victory for no frills, no nonsense, bread and butter issues in an inclusive way, in an inclusive setting. You know, Reform would argue, when we talk about, you know, NHS waiting times, and I mean, I don't believe for a second that they actually care about any of that, really. But they would say, well, we talk about that bread and butter stuff as well, but they do it in an exclusivist way, in an exclusionary way. So it's a victory for those two things. And I think that is what rankles Reform so much. They won on the basis of local democracy, and they won on the basis of inclusive bread and butter issues being communicated effectively.
And you know what? I think this sums up Reform's problems. And somebody should put this to Matt Goodwin. I mean, I will if I see him again on TV. Will he stand again in Gorton and Denton? Because that's why the Greens win. That's why Hannah Spencer won. They actually commit themselves to an area and people view them as authentic local champions, like you said. It's not the case often with Reform. A bad choice of candidate in that part of the world. I mean, Matt Goodwin probably would have done very well in the home counties. Very, very strange.